¿Cómo se encuentran nuestros seguidores de Cocodrilos del Mundo a través de la plataforma de Río Verde? Por favor, una vez más, denle like a nuestros videos, nuestros episodios y suscríbanse a nuestro canal para que tengan las noticias inmediatas de cuando estemos publicando o poniendo al aire nuestros programas. En esta oportunidad vamos a hablar del cocodrilo de agua salada o Crocodylus Porosus de Australia. Esta especie es la más grande del planeta, de las 27 que están reconocidas actualmente según la UICN. Es una especie que principalmente vive en el mar, pero puede entrar a zonas en el cual pueden integrarse o adentrarse en aguas salobres en el continente australiano o el país de Australia. Sin embargo, también está distribuido a lo largo del sureste asiático como Papúa Nueva Guinea, las Islas Timor, en Tailandia se conseguía, en Camboya, en algunos países ya se encuentra prácticamente desaparecido. O sea, hace 50 años, cuando revisamos la historia de los cocodrilos, en los años 70, por ahí, gran parte de las especies de cocodrilos se encontraban amenazadas de extinción por el aprovechamiento para su piel, y una de esas era el cocodrilo australiano. Este es un cocodrilo que puede llegar a los 7 metros, es uno de los cocodrilos más agresivos del planeta. En Australia hay una campaña impresionante de educación donde la gente sabe dónde no debe meterse porque están estos animales y pueden haber accidentes fatales. Se han hecho muchos estudios sobre las interacciones cocodrilo-humano en Australia, de manera de prevenir accidentes que, aunque no sean fatales, siguen siendo accidentes y las personas sufren. Una vez que empezó a realizarse estudios, principalmente por el doctor Graham Webb y Harry Messel y Charlie Manolis, entre muchos otros investigadores, se logró demostrar la recuperación y se empezaron a diseñar programas de aprovechamiento. En un inicio, este programa de aprovechamiento se diseñó de manera de que se colectaban los huevos de la naturaleza y eran incubados artificialmente para posteriormente criar los animales a llevarlos a tallas aprovechables desde el punto de vista de la moda o de los intereses de las grandes empresas de moda que estuviesen interesados en este producto. La piel del cocodrilo de agua salada o Crocodylus porosus es la más apreciada del mundo porque tiene muy poco hueso, tiene un diseño en sus escamas realmente muy particular, muy lineal, y la hace de mayor valor comercial, aunque no es la especie con mayor ventas en el mundo, ya que la gran cantidad o la mayor cantidad de pieles proviene de los zocriaderos australianos, como les comenté, principalmente de la colecta de huevos en la naturaleza a los zocriaderos en particular. El profesor Graham Webb tuvimos la oportunidad de entrevistarlos, ya que él, desde que empezó a estudiar biología, se dedicó al estudio de esta especie de cocodrilo en el norte de Australia, principalmente en el territorio del norte, donde desarrolló toda esta tecnología de colecta o manejo de colecta de huevos y la tecnología de incubación. Y Graham nos va a exponer gran parte de su experiencia de más de 40 años en el manejo y el uso sustentable de esta especie.
Professor Graham Webb is one of the people that create all the necessary information in the 70s when he started to study crocodiles in the Northern Territory. In that moment, Crocodylus porosus or saltwater crocodile in Australia are critical endangered. And now is one of the most successful programs under sustainable use. You can explain to us how Australia could change the status of the species during the time that you made the researches?
Well, with the benefit of hindsight, it was probably easier to do it then in the 1970s than it would be to do it today, where everyone's a rocket scientist, you know?
Yeah.
Like, the story is very clear. We spent a lot of resources trying to recover and build the population of crocodiles, just like today they're spending all these resources trying to build the population of big sharks. But if your conservation is successful and you do rebuild the populations, especially with saltwater crocodiles and with big sharks, well, obviously you're going to start losing people again, where they prey on people. So if your conservation is successful, you've got to change to management and try to work out how you're going to control it, because it's potentially very dangerous. So I think we've got the highest rate of shark attacks in the world here in Australia, but we're still spending millions, you know,
Yep.
let's increase the population. Whereas with saltwater crocodiles, what happened at the end of the 70s, they were protected in 1971, and there were very few left. You could fly all the rivers, you could swim in the rivers, you never saw them. But they did recover, and they were recovering very fast. And you did not need to be a rocket scientist to see what was going on. You know, they were building up in numbers all over the place. And big clashes took place because in those days, you know, everyone wanted to keep the endangered label, you know, because it's all to do with, you know, you can get so much money if it's an endangered species and you're saving it. You don't get as much money if you turn around and say, well, it's no longer endangered, you know. Don't say that. Don't say, you know, and so you end up with this crazy clash. But so what happened with us is when the population started to rebuild, we could foresee what was going to happen. We started to lose people, and then we enacted management mechanism. We said, right, the conservation phase is basically over because it's clear the population is going up like this.
But
And
let me, because I remember that you write in a book with John Houghton, documental, when you and John Houghton talk about many species in the 70s are endangered, like
yeah,
Crocodylus intermediate, for example, alligator
Yeah,
miscegensis,
completely.
Niloticus, for
Yeah.
example. And
Yeah.
and I remember in part of this paper, you and John Houghton say the government help or support programs when the species have economic value. In the 90s, mostly of the crocodile species are endangered. Porosus, intermedius, alligator, Niloticus. But in Australia, you could recover the population, the wild population. And for example, Niloticus is recovering in many parts in Africa, and alligator is recovering in America. In your opinion, what is the real success after that you talked before? Because the people understand that can living with the crocodile, understand that they could obtain economic benefit in the local community or something like that. What is the reason more than the investigation or research that you do it for? I don't know.
The whole premise that I've operated on is that if you expect people to tolerate crocs in the wild, there's got to be benefits for the people. There can't just be benefits for some non-government organisation or some biologist that's out there with his binoculars on in the swamp taking pictures of himself. It's bigger than that. Crocodiles are one part of basically a big ecological system in which people are all over the place. So if you want to ignore that and say, no, we can't have people, in this, it's not going to work. And what's more, what works in one country is not necessarily going to work in another country for a whole raft of reasons. So we've got to be very conscious that people are the best protectors of their own wildlife. One of the fundamental principles of CITES. And now that's all starting to be changed, because now the importing nations say, well, you've got to prove to us in our terminology and our meaning that what you're doing is not detrimental. It was never the role of the importing country to have to dictate the type of management that would take place in the exporting country. The CITES Treaty is very clear on that this is the role of the national government and it's the role of their scientific authority. Now that's been totally turned around. So if you don't like, politically, if you don't like one country, well, you can take their non-detriment finding and say, well, we just don't agree with it, so we're not going to import anything. And that is, I think that's torn CITES apart because countries would not have joined CITES if that condition had been right. We're going to, here we go, back to the colonial times. We're going to tell you whether your program upsets our little women and men and children and in our country with our social license. That's not what CITES was about. Countries wouldn't have joined CITES. That's why the CBD has no legal power, the Convention on Biological Diversity, because people have had their fingers burnt by some of these other treaties that did have legal power. So I guess I think everyone's got to lighten up a little bit. Like a problem is a problem, and it needs very cool thinking to solve the problem. It doesn't need high emotion here, high emotion here. It doesn't need. The cold reality is that if a crocodile is economically valuable to a country, that country can justify putting resources into that population. If it has no economic value, and there's lots and lots of species that need management, it just goes onto the list of all the others, so it gets a little bit of the pie. So certainly crocodiles, because of their economic value, people that really couldn't care about crocodiles at all, that have absolutely no attachment to them at all, they're just another thing wandering around there with 4 legs and a tail, suddenly they take an interest, not because they're interested in crocodiles, but economically, they're an asset. And that's just reality. If you want to go and try to convince people that they must all love crocodiles because I do, and it's never going to work. That is a problem in its own right. There's a thing called time scale of problem and solution.
Yes.
If you've got a conservation problem, you need to act now on whatever conditions are there to try to do something to make sure it doesn't go extinct. But if you're going to say, well, before we act, we've got to convince everyone to love crocodiles so they can all, have these warm, fuzzy feelings, well, that's going to take 100 years, 200 years. You can't wait that long before taking conservation action. So you've got to be pragmatic. And I don't care what NGOs, including the IUCN, all these other organisations think about crocodiles. I couldn't care. I don't care whether they like them or they don't like them. And I'm going to set about making people love crocodiles. What I mean, that's other people can do that if they want to do it, and I can appreciate that. But the conservation and the management is a pure economically driven process that does end up resulting in crocodile populations building. Now, there's always a problem if it becomes market dependent, and if the market collapses, well, then that becomes a completely different issue. But and that's sort of happening, and the reason it's happening is that the bigger companies are being blasted all the time by animal rights type organisations that this is bad, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. They're never blasted with this is good, this is good, this is good.
Yeah, I totally agree with
And
you.
they're businessmen. They're businessmen. They sit there in their office and say, "What the bloody hell's going on with that crocodile?" You know, we go, "Guys, shut it down." You know, and the animal rights people say, "Yeah, what a victory." They couldn't care if the crocodiles are not going to be tolerated again. You know, like there's a real problem with our crocodiles, at least with saltwater crocodiles. There is a real problem in every country because as soon as they recover, they start eating people and you can't expect people to be, people live in stilted houses over water and the crocs come in underneath them and grab their kids and, God, it's something that we need to take seriously. People are important. If you try and cut people out, you'll go nowhere in the end. You end up with some sort of quasi-new religion that, we'll all get down and, yes, great crocodile in the sky.
Yeah. Well, Raham, thank you very much for your time.
¿Por qué una especie que es considerada peligrosa, que los aborígenes australianos conviven en el hábitat con ellos, se recuperó? Y realmente lo que importa en estos casos es la voluntad de los gobiernos, bien sean locales o nacionales, en tratar de recuperar una especie que para el país sea icónica y las condiciones del país como tal. Porque si nosotros queremos hacer una comparación, que no es lo más razonable, con el caimán del Orinoco, el cocodrilos intermedios en Venezuela y Colombia, donde después de 50 años no hemos logrado recuperarla a los niveles que, por ejemplo, Australia lo hizo, es simple y llanamente por unas condiciones de la población en las áreas rurales. Es la manera en cómo se interaccionan los lugareños con las especies. Y por lo que nos contó Graham, hay un beneficio dentro de estas comunidades locales hacia el aprovechamiento sustentable de las mismas. Por lo tanto, es muy interesante en aquellos países, principalmente del tercer mundo, que no han podido recuperar sus especies en peligro de extinción, tomar como ejemplo todo lo que se hizo en Australia para en un futuro poder decir recuperamos nuestras especies. Con todo esto quiero agradecerles por ver el video, este episodio de Cocodrilos del Mundo. Los volvemos a recordar y que se suscriban al canal de Río Verde para que reciban las noticias de cuando estén publicándose los episodios de Cocodrilos del Mundo y los esperamos una nueva oportunidad. Se despide Álvaro Velasco, hasta próximamente nos veremos de nuevo en las pantallas de Río Verde.